Hello, it's Bernard here again, and this is a video two which we are calling Is This You?, where we are going to explore common patterns and signs with compassion and curiosity. And that is common patterns and signs that we may have emotional dysregulation or indeed trapped emotions inside of us. Now, on the previous video, we explored what impact emotional dysregulation could have on the way we feel and also our physical and psychological health. On this video, we're going to explore the common patterns and signs of emotional dysregulation and trapped emotions. And I encourage you to do that with curiosity, but also compassion to yourself. Because as we discussed on the previous video, if you do have any trapped emotions or emotional dysregulation, it's not your fault. It is what society and modern life has done to us. We were not designed for the kind of complexity that we are exposed to on a daily basis. And it takes a lot of courage to look closely and with honesty regarding whether we could have unprocessed emotions, because it can seem to be uncomfortable to explore. But is that really the case? You see, emotional self awareness is our ability to understand our own emotions and their impact on us. We know what we are feeling and why, and how it helps or hurts what we do on a daily basis. Now, ways to develop this emotional self-awareness, there's many ways really, but you could do a daily self-reflection exercise and just asking yourselves, give yourself 5 minutes every day, book it into your calendar and ask yourself questions like, what emotions have I experienced today? And how have they impacted my day? Maybe do an emotions diary for the next week. And also, with what I share on this video, maybe just ask somebody who's close to you who will give you an honest answer and give you some honest feedback as to whether any of these things that I'll be talking about here apply to you. And it's important to honestly reflect on this, as negative or trapped emotions not transformed are transmitted, which means we transmit them to other people through anger, resentment, and things like that. So, learning to transform our emotions can lead us to something that is really exciting, which we call post traumatic growth. When we learn to process our emotions and regulate ourselves, we grow as a person. So, as we go through these, just challenge yourself if any of them are patterns in your life, because patterns they can just creep up on us. And before we know it, can become unhelpful actions and habits that over time can even come to define us. So, the signs we want to look out for that we have emotions that have not been transformed or are even trapped inside of us are the biggie, really, overreacting, going between being aggressive and passive from time to time. Excuse me. Um, we are a reactive species, but we are also a species that can take a step back, stop. And what that means is S, stop, T, think, O, observe, and P, plan to respond rather than react. It takes practice, but we can. And if we are overreactive, that can be a sign of emotional dysregulation. If you find you get a lot of conflict in your life, the harsh reality is if we find that we have a lot of conflict in our life, there is a common denominator, ourselves. Now, over the last 25 years or so, when I've worked in organizations, I've been called in to resolve conflict between people on many, many occasions. And do you know what? Every single time I talk to people about what the conflict is about, it's always been the other person's fault, never themselves. People's levels of self awareness with regards to conflict that they are involved in is generally very low. So be honest with that answer as well. And related to that, do you find that your relationships struggle? That's your relationship with yourself, perhaps, but also with other people. And do you feel a little bit uncomfortable being on your own? or with other people where really you should be feeling kind of fine. Now, what about emotional people making you feel uncomfortable? Sometimes we can be seeing something in ourselves when this is happening. And it's also insecurity. When we are operating within a small comfort zone, this can often stem from behaviors we were exposed to as children when our nervous systems were still developing, for example. And if we saw a parent deal with things aggressively, then that's what we inherently do because it's just like a learned behavior from somebody else. And it can often be one of those subconscious, unhealthy patterns or habits in our life. What about low confidence and just having trouble saying no? I'm not saying that we should be saying no all the time, but sometimes we need to. What about feeling resentful towards other people, like an inability to kind of forgive and move on? And kind of related to that, do you ever find yourself accusing others of behaviors that, if you are really honest with yourself, we display ourselves? So, for example, we accuse somebody else or regularly accuse others of bullying, for example, when if we honestly ask others the question, do I sometimes come across as a bully? They might actually give an answer we don't want to hear. Then there's stress without an obvious cause. Do you find you're often stressed or anxious? And there doesn't seem to be an obvious cause. And anxiety is like an overwhelm of our feelings, of course. And then there's depression, which is a lack of feeling when there's again not an obvious reason as to why we feel so sad and depressed. Then there's feeling exhausted and just not knowing why. It takes a lot of energy to suppress emotions, to keep them inside of us. And what about being overly nervous or uncomfortable, again, in situations where you should really be okay? Just one example of this could be that you were put in uncomfortable situations as a child, or even worse, told something like, you'll never get on with anyone. It's a whole nother discussion. But it's the other person's insecurity on display when such things happen. And then there's perfectionism. Do you always strive for perfection? It's an unrealistic expectation. Continuous improvement, personal continuous improvement, that's fantastic. But I am yet to meet the perfect person. And then there's, of course, distractive behaviors, which there is so many opportunities for this in our society. Materialism and obsessions with celebrities and social media and reality TVs, these are just examples because those activities kind of numb us. And we subconsciously do this to avoid feelings we don't want to explore. And we have difficulty then expressing our boundaries. So our mouth says yes, and our conscience says, I'm not sure whether I should have said yes to that. Now, it's not always easy, of course, to recognize when we're dealing with emotional repression. And at the current time, there's not many definitive tests you can take, although I do have questionnaires on things like levels of anxiety, depression, PTSD, etc. And also, as I'll explain in a few minutes' time, we can get answers from our subconscious mind that can be quite revealing. Now, you could have trouble naming and understanding your emotional experience. This can make it tough to describe how you feel to others. So again, we're bottling things inside. But it also makes it difficult for you to recognize when certain aspects of our lives are not serving us very well. If you have a hard time expressing feelings as you experience them in healthy ways, those emotions build up and build up and build up until they eventually explode, sometimes in response to a very small trigger. Then this, of course, can contribute to issues and problems in our relationships because it's sometimes a completely out of character, aggressive outburst. Now, very often, emotions we are most afraid to feel are usually the ones we need to process. And the more we accept these emotions, the less power they have over us. Just one example, when we resist that anxiety, the anxiety about feeling anxious amplifies it, and we go deeper into an anxiety spiral. But when we look at that anxiety with a bit of curiosity, openness, compassion, and acceptance, rather than judgment, the emotion begins to quell, sometimes shift, and even sometimes transform on its own. Our emotions are messengers. We just need to note the message they are delivering to us. So, is there a link between our past and our present pain? Perhaps. I think often there is. Now, I encourage you not to let sadness, depression, anxiety, or trauma be your death. Make the decision today for it to be your birth. All of us have some emotional trauma to process, but I think the important question is, what is yours? Now, something I'm going to finish off with here today, for many of us, what I'm going to explain now can be a little challenging to comprehend because in our modern world, we are dominated by left brain driven reasoning, rationality. Everything's got to be fact based and analytical, whereas instinct is a subconscious, more intuitive, gut feeling, hunch based. And what I'm going to explain now is the latter. But when I do this, please don't have any biased views regarding what answers you want to the questions. I encourage you to ask answer the questions because they are answer the questions honestly because they are resolvable. You know, people have mistakenly thought in the past, oh, this is a good technique. If I ask if I have cancer, but no, please don't do that because we all would have a preconceived idea of what we want the answer to be, and it won't give an accurate result. So don't do it. There's also lots of ethical nasties so for the purposes of today, just go with the questions that I ask you. So this is called the sway test, and it's a combination of using well thought through questions and kinesiology, which is kind of muscle testing, but a slightly different slant on it for getting answers to questions. And so to do the test, what I'm going to ask you to do, and if you watch me now, I'm just going to stand up and you can see me kind of stood up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a true statement and then a false statement. So a true statement is my name is Bernard. And that's a true statement. And our bodies move towards what's true. And our bodies move backwards against what's false. A little bit like a plant when it's in the window, the plant will grow towards what it wants, which is the sunlight. Now, if I was to say, my name is Frank, my body just sways backward because that's an untrue statement. And you could play with it a little bit more and say where you live and say the true statement of where you live and then give a completely false statement as to where you live. And just to do a little test that is actually working for you. And then when you've done that, I'll sit back down now. When you've done that, just ask the question, do I have any trapped emotions inside of me? And just allow the test to unfold. And then when you've done that, just ask the question, am I emotionally dysregulated? Or is there an opportunity for me to create better emotional regulation in my life? So these questions are fairly benign because through the work that I do, we can achieve emotional regulation. We can also track, trace, and remove trapped emotions inside of our bodies. So there's no reason for us to be biased towards what the answer that we want. So have a little play with that. And when you've done that, please go to video 3, which we're calling Step into Freedom. And on that video, you will discover how you can become your own wellness warrior and you can release any emotional baggage that you may be carrying for good. Thanks ever so much for watching and listening. I hope you're finding it informative and I look forward to being with you on video 3. Thank you.